This week is an extra edition of Critiquing Comics. In this episode, not only do Mulele and I critique a submitted work that aims to, quote, bring back funny comics, unquote, but we also talk about a listener comment on Yiffing in Hell, discuss our own recent activities, and do some follow-up on last week's DCP discussion of the state of the podcast and how it can evolve. Before we get started, a reminder that you can support this podcast by making your Amazon purchases through deconstructingcomics.com/Amazon, and we really appreciate your support. This is Tim.
I'm Mulele.
And this is Critiquing Comics. Welcome to Critiquing Comics. This is Tim with Mulele in Tokyo on Skype. So new comic. Ned. What?
Sorry, go ahead. Yes.
We were going to chat, but I can't think of anything to say. This is my usual problem.
It'll come up as it goes.
Okay. Ned and Annie by a mysterious person who only identifies themselves as Ned and Annie. I looked at their website, which is nedandannie.com, and it just Ned and Annie. So I'm not sure who's creating this comic. Right. But when Ned and Annie sent me an email through the deconstructingcomics.com email form, and in the name field wrote Ned and Annie, they wrote, "Hello, we are trying to bring back funny comics. The link to issue 1 is here. Thanks. N and A." And so what we got is a 28-page PDF, and of course the file name is nedandannie.pdf, and it's a gag comic, basically. It feels like, it's kind of like what you might have seen on a comics page in the past, or a little bit kind of a vaudeville feel.
Yeah, it does have that vaudeville feel to it.
Mm-hmm. And it's pretty simple art. Again, like Funny Pages type art. The problem for me was that I didn't find it funny. You can see what the jokes are meant. You can see what are meant to be jokes, but either they're such hackneyed jokes that I didn't laugh, or I can see what's going to happen. A lot of them are someone swears they're not going to do something, and then suddenly they turn around and do exactly what they said they weren't going to because some other condition has been laid out for them. Although, sometimes it's a really kind of obvious condition. Let's see, where was that one? I'm going somewhere else for my boxes. It's a box store, and the customer is disgusted with the guy. So I'm going somewhere else for my boxes, and the salesman says, "So go." Silent panel where he's standing there with his arms folded. And then the customer calls, "I'll take my money with me." And the salesman starts running for the door. "Don't go." Well, it's not terribly surprising that he's taking his money with him. I think that would have been that's sort of implicit in his leaving the store. Yeah. And, it's a lot of things like that. Sometimes it's like, it feels just like it's a statement of fact where there was meant to be a joke.
Yeah. But
the statement of fact, sometimes that can be funny. But in this, it just... So, this customer a little bit earlier says, "Don't you want environmental progress?" Salesman says, "Have you seen pictures from the 1890s? Everyone is thin and miserable. When hormones get into chicken, everyone gets fat and happy." Yeah. That's I I don't know. I mean, I can see what was meant to be funny, but somehow something's missing.
I think I know what's missing here.
Okay.
But I want to comment a little bit about the artwork first.
Okay.
Ned and Annie is actually not badly drawn.
Yeah.
The criticism I have of the art, though, is that it'd be better drawn on paper than drawn on computer. Because I'm always feeling the computeriness of the lines. Because of the way the artist draws, it would seem that if they were to use a brush to ink, there would be a bounce and flow that would add to the dimensionality of the characters. It just seems to be just a little bit too thin, especially if you're going to go black and white the way the comic is. No gray tones. It's just very, very, very minimal line work. And that's actually fine for the type of comic that they're doing. It's just that the line weights are so thin that it kind of reads as weak, rather than having more presence. But again, the drawing itself, the construction of the characters and whatnot, is generally fine. There are a couple of places where some of the tertiary characters are not well defined from panel to panel, and it gets confusing a little bit. But basically, the artist is doing their job. Now, the reason why it's not funny, at least one of the reasons, there's the problem of the joke itself, which seems to be a little bit one note. It's set up as a kind of situation comedy. There's a guy, and he needs a place to live, but the only situation he can get is a situation where he shares a room with two women, and he has to pretend to be a woman to live there. Otherwise, the landlord's going to get on his case.
Yeah, or pretend to be gay.
Or pretend to be gay. Yeah, and so we have Three's Company.
Yeah. Yeah, don't get it mixed up with bosom buddies.
Oh yeah, sorry. Yeah, but the point of Jack Tripper is that even though he's in this ridiculous situation, and even though he may do some slightly wrong things, he is generally trying to do good and is likable. Ned is the biggest asshole I've ever seen in comics. He is lazy, underhanded, hates his parents, hates himself, hates the people who are looking out for him. He's greedy, and he will try to he will talk badly of his customers in front of them and then lie to them about what he just said. And for this point, there's nothing endearing about him, nothing at all. So even if a joke had a chance of being funny, it's lost because I'm not on his side. I think that's the most important thing here, is that I am not on his side. I do not care. I want to see him fail because he's an asshole. I'd rather see him win because he's doing his best. He just doesn't know what he's doing. And his assistant seems to be doing the business around him in spite of him. But the comic itself doesn't really give her much credit. It just focuses on him.
Yeah.
Sorry, his assistant is Annie, by the way.
Right, yeah. Ned is the salesman, Annie is the assistant.
Yeah.
And he's working for his dad's business.
Yeah, and his father's ready to fire him, which means his dad is kind of a schmuck too, because, you fire your own kid rather than train them to do better or give them some sort of life lesson. And this guy is willfully ignorant. He's not just stupid, but he prides himself on his stupidity. And it just makes for a really, really unfunny situation.
Doesn't it feel like we're talking about politics right now? Anyway.
Yeah, it does.
This is not a political podcast. We're talking about a comic.
This character is kind of the Donald Trump of box sales.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I would say that if when I first was reading this comic, at the beginning of the comic, I'm kind of like, well, it's kind of thin on information. The situation is there, but the characters aren't really there. They seem to lack any sort of context or relationship or understanding of themselves or their surroundings.
Well, I wasn't clear what the relationship was between them. Are they in a romantic relationship or just working there?
Well, I would like to say no, they're not in a romantic relationship, because in a desperate attempt to like something about the comic, I latched on to Annie, and I would like to think that she's a little bit better than that. But I don't believe that they're in a relationship. That she is there only to help him, but also act as the foil. Which she sort of is for about the first third until the customer comes, and then she just kind of disappears.
Mm-hmm.
And then in the last bit, she comes back and saves the business. So if we were looking at one page a day, for example, if it was set up like that, 1 page a day, and because there seems to be a lot of I don't know what to call it, like a retelling of the situation in the first panel of the next page, of the last page. So kind of looking at it on it's episodic in that way. Maybe it has a different feeling. Maybe it's a little bit easier to take, but reading it all in one shot as one book, it's kind of like, these jokes kind of land the same way each time. I'm not sure if there's any sort of, I don't feel any variation in the type of joke, or the telling of the joke, or very, very little if there is. And it starts to get a little monotonous. When the customer comes, I'm like, oh, thank God there's something that's going to happen here. And it also seems to kind of escalate and continue when it doesn't seem to want to do that as much as it seems to need to do that, or maybe the writer himself or herself got a little bit bored and decided to forward the situation. Because if he was a kind of a lovable goof who never got a break, you could see him getting customer after customer and just failing somehow. And it may require a slightly longer form than 4-panel or 1 page, but this one, he's not lovable. He gets the customer, they win the customer, and she saves the business. It's kind of weird in its setup. Yeah, it's not to say that there's nothing likable about this comic, but it just seems like the writer is not really digging into the subject matter or the characters. If this person was a salesperson and decided to comment about their work, that would be interesting. But it seems like this person has never been in sales, or at least is deciding not to dive into that for whatever reason. But also seems to apply the same lack of interest in detail for the characters. We know nothing about them, and even after their adventure, we know nothing about them. She has not learned anything from this episode, and neither has he. In fact, when they get money from the customer, he wants to go to Puerto Rico with the money. it's just kind of why. Yeah.
And I would think, it might be good for the writer to, really study some comics or other work, film or whatever, that's of the type that he wants this to be, that he feels is funny, and think about what it is that makes it funny and how are the jokes set up and written and whatever. I mean, I've tried to do comedy myself, and I thought it was funny, but that doesn't mean anybody else thought it was. And it's always good to try to learn more about your craft. I mean, you can learn by doing, but you need to study what the masters of the craft are doing too.
Well, a couple of things on that though, and it does kind of circle back to what I said earlier about the character not being likable. The characters in your comic, and I'm talking about Spider-Hag, but the characters in your comic were likable. So even if the joke didn't land 100%, you kind of had a soft spot or a warm spot for the situation or the character. And so even if the joke was flat, the character saves it. But if the joke is flat and you don't like the character, then you've got problems. And to that point, for my own work, Weird Crime Theater, I kind of liked the stories. They were kind of funny and weird, which is appropriate for the title of the comic.
Yeah. If we have Weird Crime Theater that isn't weird, would be kind of false advertising.
Yeah, and I think there was an attempt by the writer and myself to make stuff that's a little bit over the top and outrageous. But at the end of the day, some of my friends who read the comic were like, well, okay, there's no reason to like these characters. They're kind of despicable. And the fact that they lose or kind of don't win so much, again, it's a problem. I may be reading a lot into the characters because I helped create them and I designed them. But still, I look at Weird Crime Theater and I think that that is suffering from some of what this is suffering from. The characters are not characters you want to follow through any sort of adventure or situation. In this case, it's more because you don't know that much about him, other than she is just trying to do her job, and he is the biggest twat in the universe.
Yeah, I mean, like you say, it's not completely without merit, but yeah, something needs to be done about making, especially Ned, a little more likable, or have someone in the comic. I mean, yeah, there's nothing wrong with Annie, really. Annie is a likable character. She doesn't get much to do.
Yeah, she's kind of flat. But she's confident, and she is trying to do something in a positive way. And I think that is the point that makes her somewhat likable, even though we know nothing about her. Actually, the question of why make this comic? What is the intention of this comic? What does the writer want to say?
Well, he wanted to bring back funny comics.
Right, then write funny comics, but this is not it. And I don't think funny comics have ever really left us. I mean, we've got newspapers full of funny comics. And we have those classic comics that we've never quite read. Well, you read Peanuts, but
yeah,
that's still around. I could read one a day and last a couple of 10 years. But this one is not bringing back anything. It's not saving anything. I don't think it was really in danger anyway. So the fact that this person wants to do a funny comic is fine. It's the same as me wanting to do sci-fi or adventure comics. I'm not bringing back anything. I'm just doing a comic. I would ask the writer to ask themselves why they are doing this. If they have some sort of story that they want to tell, then tell the story. That's fine. But Also, I'd ask them, what are these characters outside of this room? Because the entire comic takes place in one room. Um, there's no situation or person outside of what is immediately necessary to tell this story. So we have the father, Ned, Annie, the customer or customers, and that's it. We've got this room and a desk occasionally if we need a desk. But aside from that, there's nothing.
Yeah, it's a really limited universe.
Yeah. So expand the universe. What are these people like outside of this situation? Is Ned an asshole because something happened to him, or is Ned an asshole because he's just an asshole? And if that's the case, then why would I want to know about how he will win or lose if I don't like him?
Apropos of nothing, talking about the kind of limited universe, have you ever read Get Fuzzy?
No.
I don't think it's actually in production anymore, but the reruns are running on Go Comics and get it in my email every day. Sometimes it's funny, but it's about the main characters are a dog and a cat and their owner. And so practically everything happens within the house.
Right.
And reading that comic, I always feel a little claustrophobic.
Oh.
Because, there are sort of story developments, but it ends up being just kind of a lot of talking in a room.
Yeah.
So that, but the art is fantastic. I love the art in Get Fuzzy, but yeah, I wish it weren't quite so claustrophobic. Couple of other things. I often forget to mention this, but whenever we critique a comic, I link to it from our show notes. Sometimes I forget to say that.
Oh, okay.
And other thing is that we got, well, not exactly an email. It was a comment on the blog for a couple episodes ago, Yiffing in Hell.
Hell.
Yeah, remember Yiffing in Hell, the two animals that had sex and then one tore the other apart, and I think
right, Yiffing, yeah.
ate her, I think.
Yeah.
So this is from Daniel Aruda Masa, who said, "I'm surprised that you guys didn't immediately know there was going to be animal on animal action in there. I could immediately tell from the art style." Well, I guess we don't read those kind of comics very often. I don't know.
Well, the animal on animal action is fine. But there was nothing hinting at it. And saying that the style is something that I should have read into is a little bit hard for the uninitiated.
Yeah. What kind of comics do you read?
Well, I guess that's the only thing that we've really got to go on as far as any sort of hint that it's going to go that way.
Yeah, I guess this is some particular genre that it fits into that we're not initiated into. So,
well, I suppose if I were to watch a porn for the first time, and not know that it was a porno, and just like, hey, there's this woman kind of waiting around in a bathing suit, and then suddenly the doorbell rings and the pizza man shows up with a pizza box kind of at crotch level. What's going to happen here?
I'm on the edge of my seat. What's going to happen?
And he says, "Did you order a sausage pizza?" And opens the box, and oh my God, I didn't expect that. I don't know. Maybe it is something like that, but I don't know. Even looking back on my memory of what I saw, I did not immediately expect that.
No.
Because, in the beginning of the comic, I was reading through every description, including the music cues, for every panel, and trying to really piece out the story. It was really, really hard, really, really difficult to get through for the first, 20 or 30 pages. And then I began to see it kind of flow into more of a comic style as I guess the writer kind of got into his groove. But there was nothing that really said, okay, that this is going to be one of those comics where some shit's going to go down and it's going to be very graphically sexual and very violent. No hint. Violence, maybe. And
there was another act of violence earlier in the story. It wasn't quite as graphic, but
well, to be honest, I'm kind of okay with violence. Not okay with sexual violence. That shit really triggers me, and I'm not saying that it's something that can't be in the world, but I see that. Generally not going to be too happy. I'm going to see just regular violence. I don't know. It's either documentary horror or cartoon violence or action violence, action story violence. This is one of those four, and I can basically place it into a category and then take it on that level. This one was it was gratuitous and seemed to be without purpose other than the joy of the artist. He was hitting at something that I really did not want to see. Now that's one that's unexpected. You're watching a movie, think it's a horror film, actually it's a snuff film. No. So, I mean, but regardless of whether or not we knew that shit was coming, that was a bad comic. And his Kickstarter was equally unfathomable. Did you watch the video for the Kickstarter?
Yeah, I did after we recorded the episode. Yeah, that was an odd video.
Yeah, and the guy's just, fucking with people that says, hey, I'm weird, aren't I interesting? Not really, no. More annoying than anything else, and why would I sit through this? But it just seems like a shame because the guy he worked so fucking hard on the artwork. Was amazing. The artwork was incredible.
Yes.
But the story was shit and the telling was super shit. Just to be brutally honest about it. So really, I would like to know if the the writer of the email, I'm assuming they saw the artwork.
Yeah, I assume that he listened to our podcast and then went and took a look at the comic.
Right. But the entire comic is not available online, right?
That's a good question. I guess I think I only had the Kickstarter to link to, as I recall. I don't think the whole comic was up. And there's a fair amount of it, but certainly not the whole thing. And I don't think it got to the sex scene. Okay.
Well, yeah, that comic, it threw me. Sorry, I'm having trouble organizing my thoughts, but it threw me, and it didn't. I wasn't able to recover and enjoy the book. There was no redeemable quality to it once I got through all of the sex and killing.
Coming up, our recent activities, including Mulele's comic and To the Batpoles, and follow up on last week's DCP discussion on how the show can evolve. But first, if you value the content on Deconstructing Comics, Critiquing Comics, and To the Batpoles and want to help us move up to bigger and better things, how about donating a few bucks a month via Patreon at patreon.com/deconcomics? If everyone listening gave just $3 a month, it would make a big difference. We'd be able to reach several of our Patreon goals and bring you more content, including bringing back over 120 early episodes that have long been missing from our website. Check out all our goals and rewards and make your pledge at patreon.com/deconcomics. Or you can make a one-time donation via PayPal. Send it to donate@deconstructingcomics.com.
Hi, my name is Billy Hogan, host of the Superman Fan Podcast, which explores the world of Superman and the many creators who have added to his legacy over the decades. Episodes will feature creator biographies or highlight some of their top stories they have created as well as their top characters. Other episodes will feature topics appropriate to the holiday or the time of the year. For instance, Valentine's Day will feature stories about the women in Superman's life. April Fool's Day will feature some of the bizarre Superman Silver Age stories, or some of the imaginary stories that have been published. Halloween will feature some of the scary Superman stories, or some of his strange transformations, and of course, some of the Christmas Superman stories. The website can be found at supermanfanpodcast.mypodcast.com. The blog is supermanfanpodcast.blogspot.com, and you can send email to supermanfanpodcast@gmail.com. I also have a spoiler-free comic book review blog of the titles I read every week, which can be found at mypulllist.blogspot.com, and you can send email about this blog to mypulllist@gmail.com.
All right. Anything else we need to say? You have a Kickstarter coming, or?
I have no Kickstarter coming. Still dealing with the Kickstarter that I did last time. I have, however, started publishing Mindgator again as a webcomic.
Oh.
At mulele.com/comics, COMICS. From the beginning. So it's going up every Tuesday and Friday, Japan time. And the idea here is to, by the end of the first book, I will have a large amount of the second book completed, if not done entirely, and I'll get it out to the people who ordered copies on the Kickstarter. And then I'll start putting up the second book and the third book and the fourth book as one entire online comic. The reason I'm doing this is because I want to increase the number of readers of the book. It's nice to be able to print and have a Kickstarter be successful, but it would have been more successful if I had kind of a fan base of readers to draw upon.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I'm putting it up there. If anybody wants to take a look, please go ahead. I would love to hear comments and whatnot. Comments are off for the comic itself, but you can email me or send me a tweet or Facebook, whatever. But yeah.
Okay. Well, I guess, I mean, I don't talk about my projects because the podcast is my project, but I don't know, maybe listeners haven't tried out the Batpoles. I don't know. Have you listened to us at all?
Me?
Yeah.
Oh no, I never listen to you.
Gee, thanks.
No, actually, I follow the Facebook page, and sometimes the topics seem curious.
What do you mean?
Well, when you're talking about one specific actor or one specific episode or some aspect of the show, of the original Batman series, I have this sense of nostalgia for it, but it's not something I've visited in at least 40 years.
Mm-hmm.
God, I feel old.
Tell me about it.
Actually, not quite 40 years, more like 30, 35 years. But still, I'm old. The nostalgia buttons are hit by the Facebook posts. I haven't listened to an episode of it yet as a podcast, but Might have to.
Well, I think it's one of the things I'm most enjoying in life right now, which is a sad commentary on my love life. But
It's not that bad.
well, it doesn't exist. So, but yeah, so I guess, well, part of it is that I get to do something with my brother again, which, in the 70s and 80s, we were always working on something together, but then, college and everything kind of made that difficult. But, and it's interesting to come back and look at this show as adults, and, of course, we saw it on it was a two-pronged thing, right? It does this for kids, it does this for adults.
Yeah.
And, so we experienced the kid aspect of it. But now to look at it as adults and see, all the things that were going over our heads when we watched it back then.
Actually, that's an interesting point. I never watched it as an adult. And so maybe it would be interesting to kind of dive back into that just a little bit.
Well, and especially, because Paul teaches film studies, and so he brings all these other tools to it, and, things that I might miss. And, yeah, you have to listen to our talk about the Zodiac crimes, the Joker Penguin team up.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, he caught some important things that I didn't. But that there are sexual innuendos in there sometimes that they slip past the censors. Those are always always fun.
Well, I mean, that was the 60s. And in
Yes.
fact, the government thought that they got hit to it and tried to ban the phrase "sock it to me" because they thought it was sexual. Even when they said, I think on the same show, "Good night, Dick." Say "Good night, Dick." Good night, Dick. Again, they got in trouble for that. It's like, but
His name is Dick.
yeah. I suppose they thought it was something like "Pussy Galore." Couldn't have her saying "Good night, pussy" every night. I don't know, but still. TV likes to fuck with the censors. Movies like to fuck with the censors. At least they used to. Now, no.
Are there still censors?
Believe it or not, yeah.
But yeah, anyway, I've been enjoying that quite a bit, and the research of it, and the editing and production of it, and also the listener response.
A lot of stuff for that.
Yeah, a fair amount. I mean, there are some people who write repeatedly, but there have been every time I put up an episode, I get a few emails.
Oh, nice.
And so it's enough that we can have a listener mail segment pretty regularly. So Deconstructing Comics listeners, step up.
Do we have listeners?
We have listeners.
Okay.
Or at least they download it. But don't get very much in the way of comments. So mail at deconstructingcomics.com.
Well, actually, this is kind of a good point to segue into experimental formatting with the podcast. Do you want to talk about it at all?
Well, actually, since you don't listen to the podcast, you wouldn't know. But as we're recording this on January 25th, a couple days ago, I put up I had no Deconstructing Comics to put up because what I was expecting didn't happen. And pursuant of our talk after we recorded the previous Critiquing Comics, rather than put up a rerun, I just talked about the state of the podcast for a bit, and some frustrations that I've had, and what we could do differently. And I did get a few responses about that.
Well, let's hear them.
Okay, well, I don't have them handy to read, but, well, let's see. Maybe I do have one handy.
Well, get them all. I'll wait.
Well, trying to think where, they're kind of scattered around. There's an email, there's a Facebook comment. But, yeah, so this guy, Aaron Williams, who does a podcast himself called Comics Manifest, which I listened to the latest episode today, and it was all right. Well, and he was suggesting, he said, what if you reached out to other comics podcasts and do interview swaps or have someone as a guest on your show? I've actually been trying to do that. I did it once with a non-comics podcast, and there's been a sort of idea hanging with another comics podcast to do this, and I think it's finally going to happen now with the Shortbox Showcase.
Okay.
And we're talking about we're going to do a swap kind of review things on each other's show, and now we're just talking about what to review. Let's see. And then he also suggested, he said, what if you take what works with to the Batpoles and insert that into DCP? Reviews of comics that you love, what you love about them, how they inspired you. This way you could introduce your audience to what you're passionate about and also give them the chance to know you. And I was thinking, well, a lot of those comics have been discussed already, but I can think of a few more if I can get a hold of them. The first two things that occurred to me going way back to childhood were things that aren't immediately available to me, not on Comixology, but Spidey Super Stories. You know what that is?
Spidey Super Stories.
Yes.
No.
So this was the Spider-Man on the Electric Company, the Children's Television Workshop reading show. They started that crossover in 1974, I think. And so then there was an actual comic book that was published. And Spider-Man was on the Electric Company, and then there was the comic book with Spider-Man and Electric Company characters.
See, I remember Spider-Man being on the Electric Company because that was one of my favorite segments of the Electric Company. That and Morgan Freeman reading signs.
Yeah, Easy Reader.
Easy Reader, yeah. But I didn't know there was a comic that came out from that.
Yeah. Well, I remember we ran across it in the store, and it had come out actually a little bit before Spider-Man first appeared on Electric Company. I guess they were trying to kind of build awareness by putting the comic out first. Although the comic actually ran for a number of years. I was looking up on the web. It looked like it ran like into the 80s. I was surprised that it ran that long. I wasn't reading it anymore for sure. But yeah, the last issue was dated March 1982. Well, it was bi-monthly, so they got up to number 57.
In this comic, was there Peter Parker?
I don't think so.
Yes, that was one of the things about the Electric Company. When Spider-Man was on, it was Spider-Man. It was no Peter Parker bullshit. I don't care about this high school stuff. I just want to see some web slinging, some villain punching. That's it.
Yeah, I don't recall Pete ever being there. I think he was just, in his mask 24/7.
The way it should be.
So that was one, and the other one was Not Brandak. Are you familiar with that?
I've heard of the title, but I don't think I've ever read it.
So it actually came out in the 60s, and we discovered it among the comics of our best friend's older brother.
Okay.
And it was... Now, what we didn't realize at the time was that it was very closely patterned on the 1950s Mad comics from before it became Mad Magazine. But, it was basically parodies of superhero comics. Of their own superhero comics and DC's and occasionally other publishers. But, it was very much in the vein of those early Mads. But we'd never seen those Mads, and I think we didn't recognize it as that. But it was kind of something new for us to see. Oh, they're making fun of their own characters, and we thought that they were hilarious. But I'd like to go back and look at those now and discuss them. But actually, Paul mentioned that there's there are collections of it coming out. Apparently, it's not on Comixology, but there are bound collections coming, or else inserted into. I didn't quite understand what he said, but in some form, it's being printed.
I see. Okay.
So maybe that'll be coming. I don't know.
Sorry, to the writer's comment about reviewing your favorite books. Yeah, there are lots of reviews about lots of comics. I mean, it's a $1 billion industry now, so at least the movies are, and the comics are kind of a part of that. And of course, there's lots of reviews out there for these books, but the review is not really about the comic as much as it is about you. Of course, the end product is the comic. That's what you're getting on about. But what did Tim think about this? Is, I think, an important factor you're overlooking. And that's in the context of the podcast that you're making. That is an important thing, because not only do they get a sense of where you're at, because it could be one of those things where, yeah, he's really down for Spider-Man, but he didn't like Watchmen. I don't know if I can hang with a guy like that. Or, he likes Spider-Man, but he also likes Peter Bagg. So there's something really, really interesting. What was his commentary on when Peter Bagg did Spider-Man? So that kind of stuff has a lot of weight, or a lot of interest for people who listen to the podcast, I would think, because it crosses those 2 points of interest, you and good comics.
Yeah, well, as we experienced yet again at the beginning of the show, I tend to go straight to business, because just in general, chit chat is a little difficult for me.
But don't worry about that. Just say what you want to say and let it ride. And if you want to start with business up front and it segues into something else later, then that's fine too. The format of it doesn't have to be anything in particular. But I mean, what it is though is what we're doing now. Yeah,
but just as I think I mentioned in that Deconstructing Comics, that I think some of my favorite podcasts, I mean, not all of them, but the ones that include groups of people, there tends to be a little kind of off-topic chatting a little at the beginning before they get into the meat of it, whether it's iFanboy or Around the NFL. They tend to chat a little first. But
I listen to occasionally Film Junk. And I say occasionally because every podcast is about 3 hours long now. And it's a bit heavy for me. My commute used to be about 30 minutes by bicycle. And 30 minutes there, maybe 45, 50 minutes on the way back, because, and stop at the supermarket, it's maybe an hour, but I just don't have enough time there and back to listen to an entire podcast. So it kind of, okay, well, what is the movie they're reviewing? But they usually get into a little bit of banter at the beginning, but it's always the host of the program asking, so you have any news, anything you want to talk about? And he's just kind of fishing for topics. Everybody says no, and he says, okay, well, I guess I'll get into the film. And then they just jump into the film. There's nothing wrong with that. But I mean, there are other times when they're like, okay, they're going to review a film that I really, really am interested in. I want to know their opinions. They're on 40 fucking minutes without actually hitting the film. They're talking about how they did a run from Canada to New York to check out a Best Buy to get some DVDs. It is sometimes a little bit much, but sometimes they're just straight into business. It doesn't have to be anything in particular. Each episode can be its own little unique diamond. But I mean, if you've got something to say at the end, then say it at the end.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
Oh, slightly related, and I think you saw this on Facebook. So Professor Allen, who does that same Shortbox Showcase podcast I mentioned, does the podcast with his daughter, that he awarded Deconstructing Comics the Where Have You Been All My Life award in his annual podcast awards.
Yeah, I'm kind of curious as to what exactly that award is.
Well, I think what he explains on his site is that it's a podcast that existed before 2015 that he hadn't found until 2016.
Wow. Okay.
So it was out there and he just didn't notice it before, but then when he finally found it, then he enjoyed it.
Okay. Well, that's good to know.
And a runner-up was To the Batpoles.
Yeah, I saw that. I was like, damn, he's really all over Tim. He likes him some Tim, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Nice.
So.
Well, I don't think that veering off into other topics and talking about other things is necessarily kind of not getting the business of the podcast done. I think that in some cases is the podcast. It's a point of style. We are basically a comic podcast, especially for this segment that I'm on. We critique comics, and I think we critiqued the main comic today, Ned and Annie. And then we discussed
Yiffing in Hell a little bit.
Yiffing in Hell based on a reader's comment, and which actually almost went to a re-critique of that comic.
No, not again.
Yeah, but it's basically I think that's fair, and that adds extra value to the podcast.
Yeah, well, I mean, having listener mail for To the Batpoles has really been, we get to cover some additional bat topics after our main topic. So that's been working out good.
Yeah.
Okay, well, whoever is listening to this is probably about to the end of their commute by now, so.
Okay.
So if you'd like us to critique your comics, send a PDF or a link to mail@deconstructingcomics.com, and we'll read at least the first 30 pages, and we'll talk about it on this show.
One more point. If you have any questions, answers, comments, anything else you'd like to say that is not necessarily comic-related, but either Tim or Mulele related, or just Japan related, or in general, you think would be a good fit for the podcast, give us a shout, and we'll talk about it on the podcast.
Yeah, mail@deconstructingcomics.com. So, till next time, this is Tim.
I'm Mulele.
Thanks for listening to Critiquing Comics. You can write us at mail@deconstructingcomics.com or look up Deconstructing Comics on Patreon, Twitter, Tumblr, Facebook, and YouTube. All our social media links can be found on the right sidebar at deconstructingcomics.com. Also, please give us a review on iTunes or Stitcher. Our theme is from bensound.com. This Thursday on To the Batpoles, Paul and I talk about the 1943 Batman serial. How did it influence the 1966 series? Look up To the Batpoles wherever you find your podcasts or at tothebatpoles.libsyn.com. Next week on Deconstructing Comics, at last, the long-promised Emmett Okuna interview of Neil Curtis on his paper Captain America, Patriotism, Nationalism, Fascism. The interview is done, and I have the unedited MP3 on my hard drive. so it will absolutely be in the podcast feed next week. See you then.